The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our School on Wheels workshop today, Tutoring Commercially Sexually Exploited Children. My name is Amanda Carr, and I'm the Engagement Specialist at School on Wheels, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. I'm joined by child welfare advocate and consultant Miranda Sheffield and by Rachel Thomas, who is a sexual trafficking survivor. Just a few notes before we get started. For purposes of sound quality, all participants are currently muted. You have the ability to ask a question at any time using the question pane, so simply type in the question and press send. We'll choose the order of questions and read them out loud. You may also wish to use headphones for better sound. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our presenters. Miranda Sheffield has spent the last 10 years working within the child welfare community. Early on, she worked with Los Angeles County DCFS to promote youth engagement and accountability with youth living in group homes. In the last 5 years, she worked with the Children's Law Center supporting youth in extended foster care. Miranda helped create CLC's Peer Advocate program. The program provides clients an opportunity to work with peer advocates who have had direct experience growing up in foster care. Miranda transitioned into working directly with foster youth involved in CSEC while at CLC. She was part of a CLC-specialized CSEC team, which included attorneys and case managers providing legal and social support to youth in the life. She currently works as a consultant and provides training to those in the child welfare community. Rachel Thomas has a master in education from UCLA and over 10 years experience in teaching and mentoring. She co-founded Sowers Education Group to sow seeds of sex trafficking awareness and survivor empowerment based on her own experiences as a sex trafficking survivor. Since 2012, Rachel has reached over 36,000 live audience members and millions more through numerous media outlets, including the TD Jake Show, the New York Times Upfront Magazine, and ABC's Newsmakers. Rachel was also honored by Congressman Ed Royce of California's 39th District and Los Angeles Supervisor Don Nabe for her leadership in trafficking prevention efforts. So thank you so much for both of you for joining us today and sharing this important information with us. I'm going to turn it over to you, Miranda.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to share this information with you. And as Amanda said, this is something that I've had the experience of working directly with, particularly here in Los Angeles County. And I'm going to speak to what that experience has been like. But before we really jump into that, we created these polls that we wanted to engage the audience with to see what your understanding is around some of the culture within CSEC. And I'm also excited about Rachel being able to share her experience as well with being involved in the sex trafficking culture and stuff. My first question that I would like for Amanda to be able to pose and to share with you guys is, what do you think, before we go to our next slide, is what are some of the stigmas around youth that have been in foster care?
Okay, we're gonna get that.
Youth that, I'm so sorry, not foster care. Youth that have experienced stigma.
Okay, that's up now. So everybody just click any that apply, any stigmas that you think are associated with youth involved in CSEC.
And just to ask Amanda, how am I able to see the poll?
We will get those results up for you.
Okay, great.
Yes, yep. Okay, so these are the results. You can see the percentages of people that selected the various answers, Miranda. So.
Okay. So I think because I'm doing sharing screen, it doesn't allow me, so I may have to It doesn't really
Okay, I'll list it off for you. So derogatory language, like saying slut, that's 63% of our participants selected that. That they want to do this, it's a free choice, 63%. Recovery rates are low, there's little hope for the future, 88% said that was a stigma. Mental illness, 50%, and mental weakness, 75%.
So there are, thank you for everybody that participated in that. So those stigmas are very telling, and also how our societies help to shape our understanding around youth that are under 18. And so all of your answers speak to this in a very dynamic way, because particularly with CSEC, we're going to go to the next slide. We've already did introductions, me and Rachel. These are areas of what we will be discussing today, just so you can look at briefly. We'll be talking about language, why do youth get involved in their life, which youth are targeted, which are the signs to look for, different types of sex traffickers that are recruiting youth, and ways that we can support youth involved in their life. So to speak to that poll that we just did around stigma, it's really important to understand a lot of those answers are all connected to trauma. And I know as tutors, many of you have had the opportunity to have some form of training around trauma. And this relates to it in a very powerful way, because the youth who are involved in CSEC have a direct connection to trauma. And just to go over for some of you who may not already know, the definition of trauma is trauma can be caused by overwhelmingly negative events that are causing a lasting impact on the victim's mental and emotional stability, while many sources of trauma are physically violent in nature and others are psychological. So even if a youth, for some of the youth that I had the opportunity of working with, even if the youth is someone that may have been at the beginning stages of they were curious, and then they didn't actually go out and involve themselves with setting up any type of interaction with Johns and stuff like that. Even just the exposure of possibly being in life gives them an idea of having some sort of trauma. So trauma has a lasting impact, and there's different ways of how a lot of our youth that get involved with CSEC respond to trauma. So when we think of the trauma that may take place either while they're in the life, because there's still reoccurring trauma that's going on even when a youth is in the life, and then there's trauma that may have taken place prior to them that may have led to them. Some of that may be that these youth that are getting involved in life, they may have experienced some form of sexual assault or rape prior to this experience, or some of them just may have had something where there was separation from family. In Los Angeles County, a lot of the youth that end up going into the life are youth that may have had some involvement with child welfare. And when they get to this point of where they're already in the life and they've had child welfare involvement, they end up making some crucial decisions around what that experience may be for them. So they may have been separated from their family, or they may have experienced abuse from their family, which led to them being placed in a group home or a foster home or whichever, which then causes them to be exposed to a lot of different threats that may take place. And Rachel, would you like to include something in that?
Yeah, just a note that the statistic is 80 to 90% of sex trafficking victims, both children and adults, have experienced child sexual abuse. So that's before the commercial exploitation happened. 80 to 90% of victims have experienced sexual abuse either in the home or at the hands of a relative, somewhere where there was no money exchange, but that violation happened, and it really set the groundwork of trauma, of violation of boundaries, of seeing themselves as a sexual object. So we really can't underestimate the impact of trauma before even entering commercial sexual exploitation.
Exactly. And to speak to that too is that there's different ways in how youth are responding to trauma. So some of the responses and how youth may have is that they may have a PTSD response, which means that they're having flashbacks, they're having disturbing thoughts, which is an intrusive symptom that takes place with them. And then they're also maybe having physiological responses, which is the racing heart, the stomach, a sudden sense of uneasiness, or even an avoidance an avoidance experience where some of you, I know that Amanda has said that you guys work directly with youth who are probably in high school or middle age or however. These youth that are involved with this particular experience end up having a really difficult time sometimes disassociating themselves from reality and also with their experiences that they may have had taking place before. So when I was working with a lot of CSEC youth, I remember how important it was to really make a space that was safe for them. So I had to be able to understand that these are youth that, while I may see them exceeding very well in performing their ability to, assimilate to the day-to-day performances that are needed for them to move through life, there was still a lot of different trauma that was underlying and that I needed to be prepared to make room for that, which meant that a lot of times when I was interacting with my youth, I would make sure that, even though we had really great relationships and we had great responses with one another, physical touch was a really big one. I always asked permission, like even if it was shaking hand or, is it okay? We're celebrating something really exciting. Is it okay if I hug you? To being able to do this in relation to trauma is being able to model and also being able to encourage different types of boundaries with youth that may have experienced not only trauma, but also may have some type of experience with CSEC. So being able to show a youth that I want to be able to respect, whatever trauma may have taken place with you, but also be able to model what it looks like to be able to make safe and healthy boundaries with one another was something that was very important, knowing that in any moment, a youth can have a sudden trigger, and to be able to just meeting that youth in their current state and assisting them in that way. So, next slide. Rachel, before I go to the next slide, did you want to include anything into that?
I like that you mentioned the dissociation, and what that'll look like maybe during a tutoring session is zoning out. If you notice that their eyes are staring off into space and, their body is there physically, but they're not really responsive, then that's something to not just, keep pressing forward and to just kind of check in with them. How are you feeling? And some of the physical, visible signs of PTSD would be the sweaty palms, sweaty, forehead, nervous twitching or shaking, just signs that show that they may be in some type of distress. And those are things to watch for, and to, not to point out the visible signs, but to just check in and say, hey, how are you feeling? Okay. It doesn't seem like you're really here with me talking about this math lesson right now. Is something else on your mind, or just helping them to become grounded again. So taking it at their pace and just making sure that, they stay associated with the lesson.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Rachel. And so just to also, before I go into this next slide, is that the reason why it's important, before we really jump into all the terminology that is used around CSEC and then understanding the culture more in depthly, it's important that we always understand that there's a foundation of understanding trauma, that even, as Rachel mentioned before, a lot of young folks may have already had some form of trauma even before getting into the life. And so it always needs to be at our forefront of when we're thinking and trying to process and understand ways in how we work with youth from this population. That trauma is a big foundational piece and a way of how we move and understand the youth.
Mm-hmm.
So just to go over, I know some of these terms, I have these terms up. Some of them may be very boldly put on here, but these are some of the terms that are used within the CSEC culture in the world. Is we'll have terms that are picking up a date. A youth may be on what's called the stroll or the blade, which is where sometimes visibly where youth are able to go. And in LA, one of the particular places that's known for that is Figueroa. And then in Pomona, which is someplace where I frequent too, it's Holt. And in Hollywood, there's a particular place. There's always somewhere where you have where the stroll or the blade is where people are being picked up or soliciting or being forced to solicit themselves. And then if I was able, I would definitely have everybody to raise their hands to ask this, but the term, to see if anyone has heard this term, the bottom bitch is a term that is, you may or may not hear your youth using these type of terms, but usually this particular word is something that is to strive to get to, is that you're the one who's basically in a certain role of control, of being very close to your trafficker and having it where, you have a little bit more edge than those who are else that are being trafficked. Rachel, would you like to include anything in that?
Other common terms, just for identification's sake, not these are the terms that we're going to use, but if you notice youth talking about it, the help with identification would be wife-in-law, sister-in-law. Oftentimes the pimp or trafficker is referred to as daddy or boyfriend. The trap house, the stash house, places like that kind of terminology often implies exposure to or participation in commercial sexual exploitation.
Exactly. There's different, and then I feel like even with having such a direct and close access to a lot of youth that are involved, I felt like there were so many different terms that were coming up that I myself am, still always checking in to ask like what certain terminologies are with youth that use among themselves that they find as a way of communicating with one another and within that world of these terms. So these are words that are always coming up and that some way make their way into the typical conversation of youth that are involved in CSEC. So here we have, this is just a basic list of different types of traffickers. So when we usually think of pimps, we may think of them in like the more, flashier type of way, the person who, there's images in the media that has shown pimps to be somebody that may have the ring that's on the pinky and like the certain type of look that I know a lot of the youth that I've worked with or even people before think of pimps as sugar-free. Who's a rapper, and they talk about this particular person being glorified as like what it looks to assimilate into what a pimp is. There's always these different types of images, but sometimes those images can be very deceptive in like all the different layers that are represented when you're thinking of people who are that may be involved in pimping. And then also not just the pimping that may take place where you're telling a girl to go on the stroll, but the pimping that may be taking place where a person just has a certain type of power over someone else. So all of these different types of traffickers, everything that interconnectedly makes them, even though they all have different types of roles, from the gorilla pimp to the Romeo pimp to the internet pimp to the CEO trafficker, all of them have one thing in common, that's power. So when we think of the gorilla pimp, this is someone that uses a much more brute force with having the young person, young man or a young woman involved. It's basically putting them into a place where they're dependent upon, and there's a lot of physical abuse and force that takes place to continue to allow them to be able to go out and to do the work that they do, and to force them into having to go out and sell their body and to do the things that are involved with that. A Romeo pimp, on the other hand, is someone that uses their charm and manipulates the young person involved into having them to be very codependent on them and to, basically romances them and creates this illusion of I'm the perfect person for you. I'm everything that you need, and I'm the person that will make all your worries and concerns going away. Preys on a lot of vulnerable people, and not just young adults, but also just youth in general that may be coming from an unstable household or that just may be vulnerable in a different type of way. And we also have internet trafficking, which is really big. Particularly in the last couple of years of me doing the work that I did, a lot of the youth were being recruited through Facebook. It's a really big one. And how they go about doing this is that they are able to prey on those who may be vulnerable with their different social media sites. And I'm going to have Rachel talk about the CEO trafficker.
Yeah, so the CEO pimp or trafficker is a term that I actually coined based on my experience when a man approached me and said that he was a modeling agent. So I wasn't a runaway youth. I wasn't homeless. I didn't have any vulnerabilities, that many youth who are swept up in trafficking have. But he said he was a modeling agent and that I was beautiful and that he could jumpstart my career. He had business cards. He had models with him who were singing his praises. And really, he set it up as a business opportunity to where until I was physically forced into, sex trafficking for the first, 6 weeks before that physical force happened, I really thought that I had an agent. I had signed a contract. I had done legitimate modeling work. I had been paid for modeling work. And then he, became abusive and crazy. And so that's another, major type of trafficker. And a lot of times around schoolyards or on bus stops or places where youth are, they'll see posters, make $500 in a day working this summer, or all of these, claims that they have these great business opportunities for youth. A lot of times those are trafficking related.
Exactly. And so those are, when we're, Rachel makes a very good point, is that overall, when we're thinking of people that end up becoming youth that are under 18 specifically, that end up getting exploited, we think of youth that are vulnerable, the youth that are homeless, youth that are experiencing high levels of instability at home, abuse. It's very important to make clear that traffickers are not respectable to just anyone, not just a certain group of people. They're able to get anyone caught up into the web of getting into the life. So while we are making sure to emphasize the higher risk of those who may get involved in the life, it's very important to think of those that end up getting involved that may not have any type of these precursors that we're talking about. And also the trafficker's profile, as Rachel mentioned too, is not always the profile of someone that the media and all of the different profiles that we usually think of. It can be someone that literally legitimizes themselves, and that is a business person, and that also may be somebody that actually has the background of working within an agency, law enforcement and everything else, people that may have access to power. So traffickers have there's a different array of people that end up getting involved and that end up recruiting girls. It's just important to think of all of the different ways of what that looks like. So when we think of CSEC, it's important to make sure that we define it for what it is. And I provided a very detailed definition here, but basically what it really comes down to is that it's the forced recruitment and also the forcing of someone to exchange their body for any type of bid, which is those who are under 18. Children, commercially sexually exploited children is what the acronym stands for, but also it speaks to if you are not, there's a lot of youth that end up having to, there's a difference between if a youth is having to go out and make survival decisions, and then those are youth that are being forced to have to provide their body in exchange for stuff. So if you have, sometimes when youth are in the process of running away from home or stuff like that, they're more vulnerable with decisions that they have to make in order to survive. And so sometimes there's a lot of coercion that goes on, that in exchange for me providing you somewhere to sleep, or in exchange for me providing you some food, you have to do A, B, and C. And that type of experience tends to be a strong indicator for what will happen in the future with a lot of youth too. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the stats of youth that are involved in the life. So usually the age who's targeted it's typically young, 12 to 14-year-old girls, and then young men are also involved in this too, which is 11 and 13. It's the highest rated targeted population for pimps. And 100,000 to 300,000 youth per year are at a risk of incoming sexually. And so I think it's also with these stats is to see them as examples of what the involvement is with a lot of youth that are involved in CSEC. 75% of child victims engaged in prostitution are under control of a pimp. And of these, one study estimates 30% of shelter youth and 70% of street youth are victims of commercially sexual exploitation. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, there's what particularly youth that are from the LGBT community, they end up having, especially youth that are trans, that end up getting kicked out of their home, trans Black women and trans Black young men, they end up having to engage in what's called survival sex, which is where they're having to, in exchange for sex, being able to meet their basic needs. So it's not, within CSEC, there are still many different demographics of people that are represented within the CSEC culture and community, and some that are exploited even more intensely than others. It's very important to think of these things as we're working with youth, the vulnerabilities that they're facing. Okay, so when we think of youth who are at risk, I have here listed foster youth is the prettiest, highest number, especially here in Los Angeles County, youth that are living in group homes, that have some type of involvement with the child welfare, even if it's youth that are on probation, that have been in and out of juvenile justice facilities. Homeless youth, what I also call houseless youth, as you guys know, are also a very vulnerable population, marginalized populations, which is particularly youth of color, even youth that may be undocumented, face a certain type of exposure of being at risk. I'm mentioning before, LGBTQ youth are extremely vulnerable, particularly youth that end up having to go into CSEC, a lot of these youth end up being from the LGBT community. I would like to share a particular story. I had a young man that identified himself as bisexual, and he was a young man that had experienced a lot of abuse early on, failed adoption, and things didn't work out with his biological family. During the course of all of this tumbling and unweaving of what he thought was going to be a safe type of experience for himself and a new beginning with adoption, he ended up going into a group home. And in this group home, it was, still like, I'm going to keep in contact with my adopted family, and we're going to make these things work. In the group home is where this young man ended up having an experience where he started having to go out and be involved in trafficking, mostly because he also had an experience with drug use and a really difficult time adjusting to being in the group home due to his sexual identity. So he starts off with wanting to this to be something just to get away from being in the group homes and having to not have to be in these different placements. But it ends up intensifying to where when we think of places where youth are being trafficked, young men are not always mentioned in these situations, and they are a big part of it, that sometimes feel shame of being able to come forward and to get help from different systems, which is DCFS and different types of agencies, because of the shame that may be associated with them being involved in this type of culture and work. This young person not only was being exploited in the ways of by their sexual identity and feeling some way of insecure about that, but they were particularly because he was involved and had his identity with being a young man, he ended up mostly experiencing violence from other men. Other men were the cause of a lot of his challenges, and we had to at many times find ways to provide services for him that was unique from other youth, because he was also in the process of becoming, I believe, trans and wanted to identify differently. So name changing and respecting preferred gender pronouns and stuff. So even in this situation where a lot of myself and others were working primarily only with young girls, particularly girls that are Black and brown, we had to find a way to also accommodate youth that were not always the typical profile of what we think of youth that are being exploited. And his trauma, knowing that it's not just trauma that is connected to being involved with women per se, but a lot of his trauma was coming from the men that he was involved in, and having to understand what it looked like to help model boundaries with men, and also to model boundaries around what felt safe for him, and particularly because of his sexual identity and because of the trauma that was associated with him. And I did want to, because of most of you having involvement with youth, particularly with school, the chronic expulsions and suspensions and regular truancy from school is a really, really big thing to speak of, because if a person is feeling pushed out of their school and they're feeling that they don't have space to fully show up, it leads to opportunities for them to get involved into things that may lead to further consequences and repercussions and things that they may not be fully prepared for. So a youth that is constantly having, outside of maybe having issues at home or maybe outside of having issues at the group home, it's a very strong indicator of what can possibly take place with this youth and how they have a propensity to possibly be involved in CSEC. And the runaways first or second time are the highest risk of either being picked up, where someone snatches them and forces them into having to sell their body, or where they're also having to be in a position where they're limited and being able to have their basic needs met. So they end up making some really rough decisions around how they will take care of themselves. So the exposure is really high with youth that are on that, running within that first, it said that within the first 42 to 72 hours, a youth is very strong, that they may have a strong possibility of being picked up for being involved in CSEC. And so those are big risk factors to look out for and to be mindful of when we're thinking of the youth that may be involved in CSEC. And so here we have just possible indicators to look out for. So if earlier Rachel mentioned how the possible indicators that we can be looking out for is youth that are having a lack, or that may, like, their response is that their body is there and they're disengaging and they're not fully present. Some of the other ways of how we're also looking at is that they may have a desire for the lack of regular activities. So if a youth has a constant way of how they're showing up and doing things, and then we find that they're pulling back, or they're deciding that they're not wanting to engage themselves anymore, that's also a red flag to be looking out for. Sometimes that can just mean that they're finding other things to get involved in, but other ways is that they actually may be being pulled into, or the curiosity stage of wanting to explore CSEC, having multiple cell phones. There's something called Redbook. This is where someone can create a profile and be able to solicit themselves on the internet. I put in, this is something that I found as a great indicator. It may not be something that directly comes up with the youth that you have conversations with, but a youth experiencing having multiple STIs paired with them maybe having an older boyfriend or girlfriend is something that gives clue to that they may be having other things going on other than their reproductive health needs not being fully met. And it's something to think of and to look into if this is something that's always currently taking place. And then there's a set and acquire of expensive items, like if a youth is not working, or if they're, and not to say that we do want to highlight that all of these examples that are being provided are indicators. They're ways of assessing a youth, that sometimes we know that youth have different ways of being creative and being able to, being under 18 and finding ways to make money for themselves, which is amazing. But if a youth is having a situation where they have a sudden acquire of expensive items, their nails are done, or they're having certain type of clothes that they're constantly showing and having, that's something to look out for. The youth is chronically running away. A high stage of that they've already maybe in the life, or that it's possibly they may be involved, is the tattoo branding. They have a name of someone on their face, or especially the face is always a big one, or they may be somewhere where it's on their chest.
And if I can interject, there are, all youth, well, not all, but, tattoos are in. So you're going to see a lot of tattoos on the youth that you serve. And there are 3 types of tattoos, though, that are usually symbolic of trafficking. The first, denotes ownership. We've seen tattoos, Poncho's bitch, daddy's little, money maker, just that denotes ownership. King Brandon's property. So those are pretty blatant. Another type of tattoo that is indicative of trafficking is the royalty-related symbolism. Traffickers are, you know, psychopaths. They're narcissists. They have larger-than-life personalities, and so part of the lure to them is that they are, you know, they have these grandiose personalities and personas. So they often refer to themselves as king or Don or somebody the great. And so when you see, you know, maybe a young lady and there's a tattoo on her that says King Brandon instead of just Brandon, you know, that's always something, just a red flag to take note of, that, you know, it's not a peer-to-peer relationship. There's more of an authoritative dynamic going on. And then the last type of tattoo that's indicative of trafficking is money-related symbolism. And this, you know, speaks to the psychological coercion. Oftentimes when you're in the game or in the life, your sole purpose is to make money. Whether you are punished or praised at the end of the day depends on how much money you brought in, your worth in the pecking order. Everything depends on money. And so it seeps into the identity a lot. And so we'll see tattoos of $1 million baby, moneymaker, dollar signs, you know, cash rules everything around me, just signs that that money is a very important part of their identity.
Right. Thank you, Rachel. That's we've had a lot of youth who have had these type of brandings put on them, to where when they are in the process of deciding that they want to get out the life, where there has to be a tattoo removal order for them, in hopes of them being able to transition into a new life and being able to assimilate themselves a little better, because they can be very stigmatizing for the youth to have to carry these things, and also reminders of themselves associated to this trafficker. And it also it's speaking also with Rachel with the tattoo, is that it's a signifier for others too within the culture. Is that if I see this person with this tattoo, then I know that they're connected maybe to this person or to this set and stuff like that. It puts out that type of message, that ownership, that this is someone that I'm owning, but it also is sending a message that this is maybe a part of this crew or this gang or something else that's also connected to them. And so I'm going to click on this so you guys can see it, but with speaking all about the trafficking and everything that goes on with youth, it's also important to note, my thing is going to this, oops. I just wanted to show you this website where you're able to see this fact sheet of the Senate bill that just went through last year. It's a decrim bill, and this decrim bill is where youth who are under 18 are no longer going to be put in a position where they're going to be arrested, and it stops the criminalization of CSEC victims by decriminalizing prostitution charges for minors. And it's also law enforcement, as mandated reporters, shall immediately report any allegation of commercial sexual exploitation to the county child welfare department. So rather than it being something that, where before it was something that went directly to the juvenile justice, or where it went to it having to be with the, so sorry, I'm trying to go back to this, where it went to the person having to only be involved with juvenile justice, they're now being triggered to have to now go into the child welfare. They're being treated as a victim rather than a perpetrator. So it's important to show that, and to make sure that that's something that you know of, that there's ways of how youth are able to get help and to get assistance with themselves, and to show that. So one of the next things that we want to show is myths. So some of the myths that we hear are youth who are involved in the life are making these decisions independently. They want to prostitute themselves. They're only bad kids from bad families that get involved. Youth make a lot of money. If a person doesn't like it, they can just leave at any time. So I have another poll that I wanted to have you guys do quickly that I had asked Amanda for. In this poll, we want to hear who do you think are some of the youth that are particularly involved in the life? What type of demographic do you think they are? As when we think of youth that are coming, we explain to you guys who's at risk, but who do you actually think are the youth that are doing this? So Amanda, if you can show that poll, that would be really great.
Yep, the poll is up. So go ahead, all of our attendees, you can select any of these categories and we'll see the results in just a second. Anybody else want to participate? Okay. All right, just give it a couple more. Anybody else want to vote? Okay, thank you. So here are the results. So the poll asked which demographic is most targeted. 71% said young men, 57 said young Black girls, 57 said undocumented, 57 said young white girls, and 100% said homeless youth.
Great, thank you for that. And the answer is actually all, as we said, they're all above. And the reality is that this here, listed here, is really, victims come from all backgrounds, but there are particularly different demographics within backgrounds of youth that are involved in CSEC. So sometimes when we think of youth that are involved in the life, the reality is that these youth who are getting involved, they may be lured into the illusion of what it means to get into the life and some of the things that may come with it, but sometimes they do not always know the reality of the violence and trauma that's associated with them. Sometimes pimps are using brute force, manipulation, and as I mentioned with the Romeo pimp, the illusion of love and acceptance. If you are living in a group home and you have a constant change of placements, you're no longer with your family, the vulnerability for acceptance is strong for someone to be able to provide you something that you may not have been able to get from those that you associate with family and with friends, and having that is a big thing. And so youth are not always in the position where they're able to leave. They're not always in the place where they can just get up and go because of the trauma, and also something that's called the Stockholm syndrome. Like it's something that just doesn't automatically happen for youth to just be able, it takes time and time after again for youth to really commit to making these decisions. And as you guys, a lot of you put in the poll, yes, the average age for entering young boys is that they're 11 to 13, and there are even fewer services and support services available for them, as we mentioned. So even though we know victims come from all backgrounds, particularly in Los Angeles County, I wanted to include this, is that there's a disproportionate representation of Black girls involved in CSEC. So in LA County, Black girls have the highest rates of domestic sex trafficking victimization and are more likely to be arrested in jail for prostitution than non-Black women and girls. So it's important to take that in consideration. While we know that there's different ethnicities and people involved in the life and that are involved in CSEC, there's still a visible overrepresentation of young Black girls, and this also includes young trans girls and young trans youth that are involved in this as well. And so we are providing some resources for you. I think it's important to think of different supports for our youth. I really like that we have this trauma-informed yoga, where if you are maybe wanting to have a youth that likes to do physical activity, that needs a different type of therapeutic way to address some of their trauma, there's a particular organization that provides different yoga poses that actually speaks to trauma and to the healing, and that's very holistic in nature. And we also provide the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. And if there's youth who are 18 plus that may not have services, because sometimes services are geared towards 18 and under. There's the 18 plus Journey Out. They do a lot of amazing work. And we also have legal support. The Children's Law Center, they have a specialized courtroom at the Children's Court, which was I was previously connected with, where there's a team of attorneys, case managers, and a particular judge that only works with this particular population to help provide them with services, wrap around, and they get what's called an MDT, which is a multidisciplinary team decision-making thing, where there's a group of people that come and talk about what type of plan can be put in place for these youth and provide the different services and strategies around helping and assisting them.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Miranda. I didn't want to interrupt you. Are you still going?
No, I'm good. That's it. Unless Rachel, would you like to include anything?
Yeah, just one note that, you know, it's wonderful to have resources. And one thing, though, that everyone can do whenever you interact with youth that may be involved with CSEC, one thing that you can do is really just to affirm positive qualities. Just see them as people. I know when I was, you know, recovering and trying to get out, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't need people guessing and asking what my tattoos meant and asking how old my, you know, agent was and asking a bunch of questions. I needed people who saw me as the beautiful young woman, you know, that I was, with potential, with brains, with everything, you know, going for me, all the things that I had been stripped of as far as my own self-confidence and self-esteem. So, you know, service providers who started the conversation with, how are you? Instead of making it feel, you know, very stale, like they just had, you know, to check a box and finish this tutoring session, finish this therapy session, you know, telling me that they see potential in me, telling me that I was smart, complimenting something other than my looks, because that's the one affirmation that a lot of these youth get in that lifestyle. And, you know, just helping them dream again about their own education, their own future, their own potential, and just really instilling some positive affirmations into their heads goes a long way, and seeing them as people.
Yeah. Totally support that 100%, Rachel. The humanizing piece is very important with this work. Outside of just immediately being able to provide resources, is I always encourage the people that I worked with and the team that I was with, is that it's important to meet youth right where they're at, and not to come in with an already, you know, prepackaged plan of what we think can and will be best for them. The humanizing piece goes a long way with boundaries.
Right.
Thank you so much. And we have some questions coming in. Everybody else, please feel free to ask any questions. I have a question for Rachel. Can you talk a little bit more about your recovery and what resources you found most helpful?
Sure. And I'll be brief. I know we don't have much time left, but really what I found most helpful was finding a community of support that helped me get back to my best potential. I didn't have a great trained therapist at the time. I got out in 2005, and CSEC, sex trafficking, was on nobody's radar. So when I went to therapy, the lady did more crying than I did. She had never heard of such a horrible thing. And so really what was most helpful was well-meaning people in my family, in my church, the police officers that I worked with, those who saw me and my potential and were just willing to walk the journey with me and make me feel human and whole and not judged, and hopeful, really.
Thanks. And another question, I don't know if either of you know about this, but there are a lot of magnet high schools now where students are doing self-directed study, and students might have full-time jobs or be living on their own. And this question is, it seems like this might be an at-risk population, and are these schools aware of the risk? Do they provide any counseling and support? I don't know if either of you know about the online schools, but a lot of our students do attend. So it's just interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought of this before. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of the mentees that I have are attending the online schools, you know, for safety reasons, for social anxiety reasons, because they have kids and can't make it to a campus. So I know that I have personally trained one franchise called Learn for Life, and they're all up and down California and a few other states. But for the most part, we need to do better with awareness and you know, and knowing and making aware the populations that are unknowingly serving CSEC youth, which is why I'm so grateful for today's call. Because, you know, sometimes as tutors, we're education focused and we think that we have a lesson plan to get through with the academic agenda, but really what we're doing is, you know, sowing a seed into a youth's life who doesn't see themselves as, you know, as human or as worthy of love or potential. So that's why we need calls like today, and we are working more to get more awareness out there.
Thank you so much. Any other questions coming in? We'll just have one more minute for questions. And I did want to just reaffirm what Rachel and Miranda were talking about with, you know, behaviors to think about, just, you know, as far as boundaries. We want to make sure that we're maintaining the boundaries of our students, but also really reaffirming them and making, you know, a great mentoring relationship can be really beneficial for students. And I don't know if anybody has anything else. Let's see, one person. No other questions coming in? Okay. Well, I think this was really helpful. It was really great information. I just want to thank you both for taking the time out of your day to present this to our tutors. I know that both of you might be available maybe after, if anybody has any additional questions, I can send them your way, but I think that's it for now. Thank you everybody for attending today, and we will be having another workshop on August 30th on back to school and back to school resources. So I hope you can participate then. Thank you. A lot of thank yous coming in for our presenters. So great. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.